To Turkey now, where voters are heading to the polls on Sunday. Turnout is expected to be high as there's a lot at stake. The presidential election is Recep Tayyip Erdogan's biggest challenge in 15 years and has the country holding its breath. CGTN's Michelle Bar-David reports.
There's an atmosphere of anticipation in Turkey as the country braces for presidential and parliamentary elections on Sunday. Half the country is worried its leader Tayyip Erdogan may not win, while the other half is ultra excited for that same reason. Erdogan is facing his biggest challenge yet, as opposition parties have all nominated their own candidates. His biggest rival is Muharrem Ince, the Republican People's Party candidate. Ince has re-energized the main opposition with his passionate speeches and reaching out to conservatives, seculars and Kurds, aiming to unite voters of different backgrounds. Another strong contender and the only woman candidate is Meral Akşener, representing the breakaway nationalist Good Party. Also in the race is Selahattin Demirtas, running a campaign for the Kurdish HDP from prison as he faces terror charges. Erdogan and his opponents disagree on many issues, from the economy to foreign policy. The opposition insists it's time to put an end to one-man rule, while Erdogan is promising to push forward with a transition to a presidential system. So an Erdogan win or lose could completely change the country's course. If no one candidate gains over 50% of the votes, there will be a runoff election. Though polling companies have made their predictions, with most stating that Turkey will likely head to presidential runoff elections, many have also pointed out that Turkish citizens' attitude towards pollsters have also changed due to anxieties.
People are afraid and running away. We've observed that they are unwilling to answer polls because they are scared of being thrown into prison by the government or of losing their jobs.
Nevertheless, the chairman of one of Turkey's main polling companies says they have succeeded in getting sufficient data for predictions.
Those who get the highest votes, Tayyip Erdogan and Muharrem Ince, face a runoff election, so there will be a second round on July 8th. In the second round, it looks like Ince has a higher chance than Erdogan at about 52 to 53% of being chosen as president. We might see Ince as Turkey's next president.
The defining issue is likely going to be the economy. The Turkish lira has tumbled since the beginning of the year, about 20% in value against the US dollar. Michelle Bar-David, CGTN, Istanbul.
Well, for more insight into Turkey's politics, we earlier spoke to Doctor Francis Onditi. He's an international relations expert and the head of the International Relations Department at Riara University.
Re-election, or rather not re-election, will be influenced by, depending on how much is able to garner from the Kurdish party. You know, the Kurdish PKK party is very key. The Kurdish people make between 15 to 20% of the population of that country. Therefore, they have a very great influence as to who would become the leader, even though it has been very hard for them to have a breakthrough in terms of leadership. I think the opposition leader, that is Muharrem Ince, he has also a lot of following. You remember, Ince is one of the persons who has been advocating for secular state as opposed to Islamic State in Turkey. And therefore, there is a large population of people in Turkey who are also likely to find Mr. Ince a favorable candidate. And so those factors, you know, the religious factors, the constitution that was enacted in 2017, and also the Kurdish party are the ones that are going really to define who becomes the next leader for that president, for that country. But there's also the positive aspect of that country that depending on whoever comes in leadership, would African countries or African states are likely to learn from. For example, the counterterrorism strategies. Turkey has done very well fighting the terrorists, putting strategies in place. Is something that African countries can learn from. And of course, their flights to countries like Somalia, Kenya, and other countries in the Horn of Africa and in the entire Africa It's also something which is going to strengthen trade relation between African states and Turkey. If President Erdogan defends his position and he becomes the president of that country, his relation with the Western states, as I said earlier, is going to degrade simply because he's coming in with a lot of executive powers, yet there are no checks and balances in Turkey that would be able to enable him rule the country with calmness. But also another scenario would be if, for example, let's take, for example, he doesn't win the first round and they gets into the second round, he doesn't win. If Mr. Ince, who is the major competitor, takes the mantle of Turkey, then we are likely to see a strengthened relation between Turkey and the Western powers, simply because I find Mr. Ince might trash the constitution, the new constitution that was enacted in 2017, and there could be some level of modification of that constitution so that it doesn't give the presidency executive or excess powers. But all indications are showing that President Erdogan is likely to retain the power because by him calling a snap election, I think he has read the perception, he has read the population, he understands the direction the country would want to take.